How does therapy actually work for scapegoat survivors? Does psychotherapy seem vague and difficult to understand how it actually helps? Do you worry that participating in therapy means being told that you are wrong in how you think, feel, or act? Or do you assume that you must feel worse before you can feel better in therapy? Well, 2 weeks ago on this channel, I discussed the fundamental problem for the scapegoat child, that they are not genuinely loved for who they are by their narcissistic parent, and that that parent does not value the love the child has to offer them. The child's solution is to form unconscious pathogenic beliefs that they are undeserving and or defective, so that they stay hopeful that their parent may meet these two needs sort of eventually. And then last week, I went into more detail on how these beliefs require the child sacrifice their developmental goals of agency, self-worth, and self-efficacy. In today's video, I'm going to show how the scapegoat survivor brings their painful pathogenic beliefs and their earlier sacrifice developmental goals into therapy. Then I'm going to explain how therapy works, whether it be CBT or psychodynamic, whichever, to allow survivors to test and disconfirm these beliefs with the therapist. When these beliefs are sufficiently disproven, the survivor will feel freer and safer to resume pursuit of the goals they had to sacrifice earlier in life. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in recovery from narcissistic abuse. In my professional and personal experience, I've worked to identify the fundamentals to the process of recovery. And this has led me to what I call the 3 pillars of recovery. Pillar number 1 is making sense of what happened so that you know it was not your fault. Pillar number 2 is gaining distance from narcissistic abusers and closeness to safe people. And pillar number 3 is living in defiance of the narcissist rules. I think it's also essential to find and participate in communities of people who can get, validate, and support you on this path. I've both seen and experienced large improvements in quality of life after applying these pillars. Today's video falls under pillar number 3, living in defiance of the narcissist rules. And if you'd like to explore more content in this specific pillar, you can watch the playlist called Living in Defiance of the Narcissist Rules. Let's start with a theory of therapy that has been proven to work. Well, this information about the traumas faced by scapegoat children, the pathogenic beliefs they forged to survive these traumas, and the developmental goals they have to give up all stem from a model of therapy called control mastery theory. I'm going to use the shorthand CMT as I go forward. So the CMT model assumes that clients unconsciously control the contents of their inner experience and that they want to master prior traumas. Pathogenic beliefs reflect one of the ways we exert unconscious control over our inner lives. The scapegoat child with the unconscious pathogenic belief that they are undeserving will have conscious experience that is filtered through this belief. They will likely think conscious, self-diminishing thoughts and make conscious choices that reflect their unconscious assumption of undeservedness. All of this happens because the scapegoat child's unconscious determined that they were in danger of, say, being nobody to no one if they did not identify as the undeserving person that their narcissistic parent insisted they be. Control mastery theory, CMT, says that our unconscious determines what we let into our conscious minds based on what's safe. Scapegoat children tend to feel safe when they know their parent is attached to them, and they feel endangered when that willingness is jeopardized. As we've already seen, this child's steps towards self-efficacy, self-worth, and agency jeopardize their narcissistic parents' willingness to attach to them. CMT explains that the child's unconscious works to understand what leads to danger and then creates strategies to avoid that danger. So pathogenic beliefs reflect how the scapegoat child unconsciously thwarts these developmental strivings in order to preserve their faith in their parents' willingness to attach to them. Control mastery theory credits the unconscious with complexly adapting to dangers posed by a narcissistic parent, as well as continually searching for conditions that might make it safe to surrender these adaptations. The child's unconscious both protects from the immediate danger of losing their narcissistic parents' willingness to attach to them, but also remains motivated to find new relationships where they do not have to choose between their own happiness and the security of the other's attachment to them. So put another way, the scapegoat child's unconscious ensures that the child's conscious life complies with their pathogenic beliefs of being defective and or undeserving, and looks for opportunities with other people where these beliefs might be put to the test and hopefully prove unnecessary to maintain these other person's attachment to them. The scapegoat survivor's needs for self-efficacy, self-worth, and agency never go away. They just get stored in the unconscious. The inherent drive to get these needs met is what motivates the survivor to seek conditions where this might be possible. It would have been far too psychologically dangerous to entertain these needs consciously while dependent on their narcissistic parent. Enter the setting of psychotherapy. This is a great place for a scapegoat survivor to see if they must continue complying with these pathogenic beliefs or hopefully not. The stage is set for the therapist to understand the client's efforts to answer this question, and then for the therapist to respond in specific ways that suggest the client is safe to defy these beliefs in their therapeutic relationship. And if the therapist holds an attitude towards the client and or explicitly responds in ways that show that the therapist does not require the client to seem defective or undeserving for them to stay attached to the client, then that client may find it safer to pursue the goals, again, of self-efficacy, self-worth, and agency, which they had to sacrifice earlier with their narcissistic parent. Control mastery theory lays out a way to understand each specific client's unconscious efforts to disconfirm their pathogenic beliefs in therapy so that they are freer and safer to pursue these goals. When the therapist responds in ways that facilitate these efforts, the client tends to improve. And when the therapist does not, the client tends to stagnate or get worse. And this is not theoretical. Control mastery theory researchers have painstakingly evaluated whether this theory holds up in actual therapy sessions. And they did this in a rigorous and I think ingenious manner. Broadly put, in 4 large-scale studies, they looked at transcripts of therapy sessions and asked independent raters to form an understanding of each client's goals for therapy and infer the pathogenic beliefs that stood in each client's way. Then these raters gauged whether the therapist's responses seemed helpful in disconfirming the client's pathogenic belief or not. Finally, they were asked to rate the client's state after the therapist's response. In essence, did the client seem better off, neutral, or worse off? What they found was that if the therapist's response contradicted the client's pathogenic belief, then the client seemed better off, and vice versa. And just to kind of illustrate it, hypothetically, here's the kind of therapist response to a scapegoat survivor that a control mastery theory researcher would tend to find helpful. And then I'll also go through one that they might say is not helpful. So let's start with the helpful one. Start with the client. They come in and they say, I finished my paper for English class, but I stayed up all night and turned it in at the last minute. Therapist says, I see. Were you happy with the paper itself? Client, well, yeah, I suppose. And the therapist, it sounds like you accomplished something, but I get the sense that you are diminishing the value of your achievement by saying that you stayed up all night working on it. Client, well, yeah, it feels like it would be arrogant to just come in here and announce something I did well. Therapist, arrogant? I can see how that would make sense based on your earlier experience, but it seems like now you might be hoping for a different welcoming response to your accomplishments. And here's a sequence that would likely be rated as unhelpful. So client comes in and says the same thing. I finished my paper for English class, but I stayed up all night and turned it in at the last minute. This therapist says, what do you think prevented you from working on it earlier? And the client says, I don't know, I've always procrastinated. Seems like there's nothing I can do about it. My parents would always tell me that I'm unfocused and need to be more responsible. And this therapist says, it seems like something gets in your way from working as efficiently as you would like to. So let's think of both these examples. In the first one, the therapist has an understanding that the client is testing whether they have to show up as defective for that therapist to stay connected to them. So that therapist responds in a manner that contradicts the idea that there's something wrong with how the client got their paper done. That therapist focused on the obscured fact that the client got the paper done in the first place. And the client seemed better off in that example, as evidenced by their further exploration of why they diminished their accomplishment in the first place, like when they talked about their fear of being seen as arrogant. In the second example, the therapist did not challenge the client's diminishment of their achievement of finishing their paper. Instead, this therapist responded in a way that reinforced the client's pathogenic belief that there is something wrong with them. In this case, the thing wrong with them was that they did the paper supposedly at the last minute. As a result, the client was worse off after the therapist's response. We see that in how they went on to berate themselves as being unfocused and irresponsible. We could say that the therapist failed the client's test of the belief that the client is defective, and the client responded by feeling even more defective. So the essence of control mastery theory is the client's unconscious search for safety. And I want to take a deeper look at the concept of safety in therapy. Well, one of the founders of control mastery theory, named Joseph Weiss, determined in the 1950s that clients spontaneously achieve insights in therapy when they feel safe enough to do so. This stood in some contrast to the psychoanalytic adage that insight is what catalyzes emotional release. And Joseph Weiss, explained this with an analogy from the movies. And I'm going to quote him here. He says, certain individuals cry at the happy ending of a movie rather than, as one would expect, at the sad situation that preceded it. Such people, for instance, are not moved to tears when the lovers separate, but save their tears until the time when they are happily reunited. The grief and the impulse to cry are repressed until the situation no longer merits this reaction. Then, at the happy ending, there's no longer any need for the grief to be repressed. When the inhibition is lifted, the energy that is used to maintain it is unnecessary and may be discharged, causing pleasure and allowing for the expression of grief. Well, Weiss theorized that we cannot cry when the outcome is uncertain. To do so would make a bad situation worse. Our psyches only allow us to feel our feelings when the danger has passed and safety is assured. Therefore, Weiss concluded it's the relief from danger that allows us to experience and understand previously warded off experience. In essence, we need to feel better before we can feel worse, not the other way around. Once safety is present, then difficult feelings can be brought forward. For the scapegoat survivor, they have had to ward off from awareness their motivation towards self-efficacy, self-worth, and agency. It was these positive aspects of their experience that endangered their narcissistic parents' willingness to attach to them. So, safety for this type of client would happen when the client unconsciously determines that the therapist's attachment to them will not waver if they bring these positive motivations forward. Importantly, the client's accessibility to these three dimensions of their experience reflects the presence of such safety in the treatment. In a nutshell, here's an important sequence to keep in mind when thinking about safety for the scapegoat child. First is the danger, and that is when the narcissistic parent's willingness to attach to the child and/or to value the child's attachment to them is in jeopardy. Second is the initial solution. Pathogenic beliefs, call them unconscious pathogenic beliefs, around themes of being defective and/or undeserving that ward off strivings for self-efficacy, self-worth, and agency, which at the time create this danger. Third, the search for safety. Unconsciously evaluating new relationships to see if the other's attachment and/or valuing the scapegoat survivor's attachment to them requires continued adherence to their pathogenic beliefs or not. And fourth, when safety is found, the unconscious and deeply felt conclusion that the answer to the third question above is a resounding no, so that the survivor can allow themselves to pursue the developmental goals that used to endanger them. And I want to talk a little bit about what I kind of think of as a colleague once said this in reference to a consultation we were doing on a client, that this client seemed to have a beautiful unconscious. One thing to take away from today's discussion on control mastery theory is that we have more to rely on than we may consciously be aware of. In fact, our unconscious is always striving for us to find the safety that was not available earlier in life. And this idea may come as a profound relief, given how alone scapegoat children and survivors have had to feel and be. Most scapegoat survivors have felt like it is up to them and them alone to feel better. The knowledge that our unconscious is also working on our behalf can provide a basis for faith that things will, in fact, get better. Well, I hope that today's video may have tied together some of the strands from the last 2 weeks into kind of an understanding of how therapy can be effective for scapegoat survivors to bring about and challenge and hopefully disconfirm the pathogenic beliefs that had to be adopted to survive this type of childhood. And before I go, I want to let you know about a new opportunity to further your recovery from narcissistic abuse. It's called the Rise and Reclaim Healing Toolkit for Survivors. And in it, you'll receive my book called Growing Up as a Scapegoat Child to Narcissistic Parents, A Guide to Healing, along with 2 other tools. The first tool is a worksheet that offers a structured approach to organizing your recovery process, allowing you to focus on key areas of healing each month. You'll also receive the second tool is a quick guide to recovery from narcissistic abuse, which offers a concise, easy to follow guide that outlines the essential steps to start your recovery and regain control of your life. And you can find the link to the toolkit in the description box below. Oh, and lastly, in today's video, I provide some information that's based on some research studies that have been done. And you can find the references to those studies also in the description box below. Well, thanks for tuning in this week and for your continued support and engagement with this channel in the comments about your own experience and kind of supporting each other. It's always just so awesome to see. And with that, I look forward to posting again next week. Take care.